Some fizzled out spectacularly.
Let's rewind the clock to 15 beautiful little things from the 1970s that kids today might never understand. But for those of us who lived it, these moments will never fade. Playing outside until the streetlights came on. There was a kind of freedom in the 1970s that's hard to explain to kids today. You'd throw on a pair of cut-off jeans, grab your bike, maybe not even tell your parents exactly where you were headed, and disappear for the day. You played in the woods, built forts, raced down gravel alleys, and hopped fences into neighboring yards without a second thought. Lunch. Maybe you ran home for a peanut butter sandwich, maybe you didn't. Streetlights were the universal curfew. As dusk settled and the warm glow buzzed to life along the sidewalks, you knew it was time to head back. Sweaty, bruised, mosquito-bitten, but happier than any video game high score could ever make you. The whole neighborhood felt like an endless playground. There was trust from parents, from neighbors, and from the kids themselves. We learned risk. We learned resilience. We learned how to handle ourselves without a phone call every hour. Building rickety ramps with old plywood and trying to jump them on my banana seat bike. Catching lightning bugs in jars we poked holes into, only to let them go just before bedtime. Playing hide and seek across 3 entire blocks and knowing every nook, bush, and creaky fence like the back of your hand. It was dangerous. It was messy. It was glorious. And it's a kind of freedom most kids today will never quite understand. Saturday morning cartoons. If you grew up in the 70s, Saturday mornings weren't just about sleeping in, they were about ritual. You'd bolt out of bed still in your pajamas, grab the biggest mixing bowl you could find, dump in a mound of Cap'n Crunch or Fruit Loops, and plant yourself in front of the TV for the next glorious 3 or 4 hours. Cartoons were only on Saturday mornings. No Netflix. No YouTube Kids. If you missed Super Friends or Bugs Bunny or the Pink Panther show, tough luck. You'd have to wait a full week. Those hours were pure magic. Bright colors on tube TVs. Jingles for sugary cereals and Saturday toy commercials. Laugh tracks on Hanna-Barbera cartoons. You didn't multitask. You didn't scroll. You were fully there. Some houses even smelled different on Saturday mornings. A mix of burnt toast, maple syrup, and dusty TV tubes heating up. And your siblings. They weren't your enemies yet. They were your couch buddies, trading jokes and fighting for the best seat closest to the screen. Saturday morning wasn't just for cartoons. It was for being a kid, completely unapologetically, joyfully family dinners every night. In the 1970s, dinner wasn't optional. Around 600 p.m., kitchens buzzed with noise, the clatter of pans, the clink of silverware, the thump of a screen door swinging shut as kids rushed in from playing. No one texted on my way or ate microwaved leftovers alone at 9 p.m. You sat down together. Moms wore aprons. Dads maybe still smelled faintly of aftershave and sweat from a long day at work. Conversations were messy, loud, imperfect. You talked about grades, friends, what was on Walter Cronkite that evening. Sometimes arguments flared over who got the last roll or why Bobby didn't do his homework. Sometimes you sat in silence, just grateful for mashed potatoes and gravy. And sometimes you laughed until you cried. Family dinners were the anchor of the day. They taught manners. They built bonds. They made you feel deep in your bones that no matter what the world threw at you, you belonged somewhere. Looking back, the meals themselves weren't memorable, but the people that clatter and clamor and chaotic love, that's what made us strong. Station wagons without seat belts. Nothing screamed family adventure, quite like a station wagon loaded with kids, pets, coolers, and zero seat belts. In the 1970s, the family station wagon was a symbol of freedom. Moms and dads packed us in, sometimes 5 across in the back seat, sometimes 2 or 3 wedged into the way back facing traffic, waving wildly at truckers. We sprawled on vinyl seats that burned the backs of our legs in summer, leaned over the back seat to wrestle over a Viewmaster, or laid down for naps during long drives. No booster seats, no regulations, just pure wobbly trust. The way back was a world unto itself. Some kids brought coloring books. Some just stared out the window, imagining adventures. Some kids like me counted cars by color, secretly wishing every third truck would be a shiny red one. Parents didn't check apps for traffic updates. They fought over folding road maps while Dad muttered, "I know a shortcut." Sure, it wasn't safe by today's standards, but the laughter, the songs sung out of tune, the snacks passed hand to hand while the windows steamed up from laughter, that was family. And somehow, most of us survived with nothing worse than a skinned elbow. Without technology, remember being in a car for 8 hours with nothing but your imagination. Road trips in the 1970s were a test of endurance and creativity. There were no tablets, no backseat DVD players, no Spotify playlists. We had 2 choices: look out the window and make up your own fun. License plate games, counting cows, playing I Spy until cheated. The AM radio static-filled tunes, Fleetwood Mac, maybe a bit of Merle Haggard. If you were lucky, the station didn't fade into static 5 miles down the highway. Meals were roadside diners with sticky booths and smiling waitresses who called everyone honey. Motels flash TV signs like it was the height of luxury. The journey mattered as much as the destination. Maybe more families sang, argued, played pranks, shared stories. And somewhere between the endless fields, the broken vending machines, and the sunset slipping behind the horizon, we found adventure. Maybe you remember sitting in the back seat, forehead pressed to the glass, counting stars, until you fell asleep to the hum of tires on pavement. Vinyl records, long before playlists and algorithms. There was the simple, sacred act of dropping the needle on a vinyl record. In the 1970s, music wasn't just background noise, it was an event. You thumbed through heavy sleeves in the living room cabinet, flipping past Cream, Simon and Garfunkel, Janis Joplin. You picked carefully based on your mood, the weather, the kind of afternoon it was shaping up to be. Lowering the tone arm onto the spinning black disc was a ritual. The soft static, the first crackle, the thump of the needle finding the groove, it was magic. We didn't shuffle songs. We didn't skip. We listened to whole albums from beginning to end, the way the artist intended album covers, doubled as posters. Lyric sheets were memorized like sacred texts. And when you got your first record player or your first grown-up album, bought with allowance money, you felt like the coolest person alive. Even today, hearing the opening bars of a vinyl spun favorite, maybe Hotel California, maybe Tapestry, it doesn't just bring back a song, it brings back a room, a smell, a season of life. Making mixtapes. Before, there were playlists, cure rhythms. There were mixtapes, handmade, heart-poured collections of songs that told a story only you understood. In the 1970s, making a mixtape wasn't just hitting save, it was an art, a ritual, a statement. You'd sit by the radio for hours, finger hovering over the record button, waiting for the DJ to spin your favorite song. You prayed they wouldn't talk over the intro. You cursed softly when they did. Timing was everything. You wanted the songs to flow one into the next, like a perfect conversation between melodies. Some mixtapes were for friends. Some were for secret crushes. Some were for yourself. A soundtrack for your summer, your heartbreak, your growing up. Remember, crafting handwritten track lists, decorating cassette cases with stickers, doodles, inside jokes only you and your best friend understood. Each cassette was a physical piece of time capturing not just music, but moments, feelings, entire seasons of your life. Today, playlists disappear with a swipe, but mixtapes, they're forever burned into our hearts. Maybe we didn't have smartphones, or streaming, or 100 ways to stay connected. But back then, we had bike rides that lasted till dusk, water from a garden hose that tasted like freedom, and family dinners that stitched us all together, tighter than we ever realized. If even one of these memories brought you back, hit that subscribe button and let's keep these beautiful days alive here at Retro USA Memories. Let's rewind the clock to 15 beautiful little things from the 1970s that kids today might never understand. But for those of us who lived it, these moments will never fade. It was about green stamps, those tiny, sticky tokens of hope and patience. Every trip to the supermarket, the gas station, the department store meant a handful of S&H green stamps stuffed into your mom's purse. Kids would scramble to paste them neatly into booklets, careful not to rip. Whole families schemed about what they were saving up for. A shiny new toaster, a set of crystal glasses, maybe that coveted wagon for the youngest sibling. Redeeming the stamps was an event. You'd walk into the redemption center, a cross between a department store and a treasure trove, and finally trade in months of saving for something tangible, something earned. In a world before loyalty, apps, and cashback bonuses, green stamps taught kids and parents alike the value of delayed gratification. And decades later, just the sight of that green and white logo can still trigger the sweet memory of sticky fingers, glossy catalogs, and dreams glued onto brown pages. Malls as the ultimate hangout, long before social media, before viral videos and TikTok dances, there was the mall, and it was everything. In the 1970s, malls weren't just places to shop. They were safe havens for teenagers, freedom wrapped in climate-controlled air conditioning. You met under the food court clock. You roamed in packs from Orange Julius to Spencer's Gifts, past the glowing arcade, and into the record store to flip through LPs you couldn't afford. Maybe you scored a first kiss by the fountain. Maybe you got caught sneaking into the theater for a PG-rated movie. Maybe you just wandered for hours dreaming. Moms loved malls because they were safe. Teens loved malls because they weren't at home. And the food, greasy pizza slices, giant pretzels, frozen yogurt, the staples of a youth well spent. Malls taught us how to meet up, how to hang out, and how to be just a little more grown up while still clinging tightly to the last best parts of being a kid. Party lines. Imagine a receiver to call your friend and hearing two complete strangers already deep into a conversation about pie recipes and church gossip. Welcome to Party Lines. In rural America, through the 1960s and early 70s, multiple households shared a single telephone line. Your ring was different. Two short rings, one long. But let's be honest, curiosity often got the better of manners. We eavesdropped. We giggled. We learned way more about Mrs. Thompson's gallbladder surgery than we ever wanted to. Sometimes you needed the phone urgently. You'd politely pick up, listen awkwardly for a gap, and interject. "Excuse me, could you hang up? I need to call the school." And if the line was busy too long, moms would march down the street and knock on doors to settle things, neighbor to neighbor. There were no texts, no private college crushes without the whole town knowing. It's taught us patience, negotiation, and the fine art of keeping secrets or not. And sometimes late at night, if you picked up quietly, you might just catch a forbidden love story whispered in the static drinking water, straight from the hose, hot day, dusty sneakers. You dropped your bike onto the lawn, ran to the side of the house, and yanked the garden hose from its metal holder. You turned the spigot full blast, waited for the scalding hot first burst to clear, and tipped that hose right into your mouth. It tasted like rubber, like sun-baked vinyl, like freedom. Nobody cared about BPA or filtration systems. No one worried about lead pipes or water purity levels. You were thirsty, and the hose was there. Sometimes you sprayed your friends. Sometimes you sprayed yourself. Sometimes, if you were lucky, you sprayed the dog, and he chased you around the yard. Barking garden hoses weren't just for drinking. They cooled you off, washed your scraped knees, and filled up wading pools until they sagged and split under the weight. Some memories come in high def. This one, it comes back cool, sharp, and deliciously real, like a mouthful of hose water on a 95-degree afternoon. Homemade book covers for textbooks. September meant school supply shopping, a new pencil case, a 3-ring binder, and of course, stacks of battered dog-eared textbooks handed down from older students. The first assignment wasn't algebra or spelling. It was covering your textbooks. You'd sit at the kitchen table with brown grocery bags, safety scissors, and a roll of Scotch tape carefully crafting covers that fit just so. Some kids doodled all over them, hearts, lightning bolts, the names of rock bands scratched in bubble letters. Some kept them pristine, terrified of Ms. Jacobs and her zero tolerance for damaged books policy. The smart ones used the inside folds to hide cheat sheets, dates for history class, conjugations for Spanish. Homemade book covers weren't glamorous, but they were personal creative and a rite of passage. Every scribble told a story. Every bent corner said, "I survived another year." And every saved grocery bag tucked into the bottom of a backpack meant you were ready for whatever the year might throw at you. Passing notes in class. Before texting, before WhatsApp, before secret Snapchats, there was the humble, heroic, heart-pounding note passed in class. You'd fold a torn piece of notebook paper into intricate shapes, triangles, squares, little footballs, and flick or sneak it across desks when the teacher wasn't looking. One eye on the clock, one eye on Mrs. Collins scribbling equations on the blackboard. Inside those notes, worlds. Did you hear about Tommy and Lisa? Want to come over after school? I like you. Do you like me? Check yes or no. Getting caught meant serious consequences. Allowed ahem from the teacher. Detention, humiliation as she read your deepest 12-year-old thoughts aloud to the entire class. But when a note made it through, the rush of triumph, the whisper of rebellion, the secret smile passed from one side of the room to the other. We weren't just sending messages, we were building friendships, taking risks, falling a little bit in love, one folded scrap at a time, riding bikes without helmets. Freedom came on two wheels, not on motorbikes, not on scooters, but on battered Schwinn, Stingrays, banana seats, gleaming in the sun and not a helmet in sight. You felt invincible. You popped wheelies. You raced down gravel alleys without brakes. You played Evel Knievel over homemade ramps made from scrap wood and cinder blocks. Skinned knees were badges of honor. Torn jeans were just uniforms of glory. Parents weren't reckless. They just believed in toughness, resilience, and the occasional tetanus shot. And if your best friend wiped out, what did you do? You laughed. You helped them up. You dared them to try it again. Those rides didn't just get us from point A to B. They gave us our first taste of freedom, adventure, and the purest kind of summer joy. Monday night football family events. In the 1970s, Monday nights weren't just another weekday. They were sacred. Around 8 p.m., dinner dishes clattered into sinks. Homework was stuffed half-finished into trapper keepers, and dads clicked the TV dial to ABC Howard Cosell's unmistakable voice cut through living rooms across America. Welcome to Monday Night Football. Families crowded onto couches. Bowls of popcorn were passed around. Arguments broke out over which team was better. Some kids snuck sips of Coke late into the night. Some moms rolled their eyes but stayed just to feel part of it. The games themselves. Sure, they mattered, but mostly Monday nights were about belonging, about routines that stitched families together, about the shared cheers, the groans, the sleepy trips to bed afterward, still wearing your team's jersey. Monday Night Football wasn't just a game. It was an American tradition, a heartbeat, a memory that still echoes down through the years.
Ah, the 1970s, a time of disco balls, shag carpets, and radioactive heart implants. Welcome back to Retro USA Memories, where we don't just bring back the good old days, we also remind you how lucky we are to still be alive. Today, we're diving into 9 inventions from the 70s so wild, so shockingly dangerous, they were eventually banned for good. Buckle up. Or don't. It's the 70s. Seatbelts were optional anyway. 1. Radioactive pacemakers. In the 1970s, medical innovation was booming. and nothing said cutting edge quite like implanting a nuclear reactor inside your chest. These devices were powered by plutonium-238, a radioactive element also used in space probes and nuclear warheads. The logic batteries that could last 20-30 years without replacement, a dream for heart patients. But there was a small catch: if the pacemaker was damaged in an accident or during cremation, it could release radioactive material into the environment. Most people in the general public had no idea that these nuclear-powered pacemakers even existed. They were developed mostly through military contractors and elite medical programs, and while they were implanted in several hundred patients, they were never widely advertised. Medical professionals were divided. Some praised the long battery life, while others quietly whispered, "Wait, we're putting plutonium in people." The turning point came in the late 1970s and early 80s, as public concern about nuclear safety, especially after the 3 Mile Island incident in 1979, grew. Suddenly, having a ticking radioactive time bomb in Grandpa's chest didn't feel so reassuring. By the mid-1980s, production was halted, and today, they're not used anywhere outside of very specific aerospace projects. Fun fact: special retrieval teams were trained to safely remove pacemakers from deceased patients to avoid contamination during cremation. Yes, people had a literal nuclear end-of-life plan. 2. Radium dial watches. Glow-in-the-dark watches felt like pure magic in the early 20th century, and even into the 1970s, some cheap luminous models still used traces of radium paint. These watches had a dark history. In the 1920s and 30s, female factory workers, later known as the Radium Girls, were told to lick their paintbrushes for precision as they painted glowing numbers. They were assured the paint was safe. It wasn't. Many developed horrific illnesses: jaw necrosis, anemia, and bone cancer. Lawsuits followed, but somehow, radium-based products lingered on shelves and wrists into the 70s, especially in cheap imports or older stock. By the 1970s, most Americans were vaguely aware that radiation equals bad, thanks to growing Cold War fears. But the average consumer didn't realize that their glow-in-the-dark watch might be radioactive. As technology improved, safer alternatives like tritium and phosphorescent paints replaced radium, the U.S. Government officially banned consumer radium use in watches by the late 1970s, although leftover stock circulated into the early 80s. My take: time flies, especially when your wristwatch could double as a Geiger counter. Beautiful, deadly, and glowing with regret. 3. Thalidomide pills. Thalidomide is perhaps one of the darkest pharmaceutical chapters in modern history, and by the 1970s, it was still haunting the world. Initially released in the late 1950s as a remedy for morning sickness and insomnia in pregnant women, thalidomide was hailed as a miracle drug, especially in Europe. But within a few years, horrifying consequences emerged: thousands of babies born with severe limb deformities, underdeveloped organs, and even missing eyes. FDA Inspector Francis Kelsey famously blocked its approval in 1960, citing insufficient safety data. That decision likely spared thousands of American families. However, by the early 1970s, thalidomide was still available in some countries, and leftover supplies existed globally, often through black market sales or experimental use. Reactions in the U.S. ranged from horror to cautious scientific curiosity. Some researchers investigated whether thalidomide could treat leprosy, AIDS, or multiple myeloma, which it eventually was approved for, under very tight restrictions, in the 1990s. By 1970, it was banned for general use in most Western countries, but the scars remained, both physical and emotional. My take: this is one of those stories where science failed the people, and then somehow came full circle. The drug was dangerous, but the bureaucracy that let it spread, even worse.
Really sure kill feature of this insect killer isn't simply
4.
that it contains
DDT, the pesticide
it's
that
the way
killed
that it
more than
makes
just
sure
bugs.
that bugs get the DDT
In the
that's in it.
1970s, DDT wasn't just in your bug spray, it was practically part of the food chain. First introduced in the 1940s, DDT, dichlorodiphenyltrichloroethane, was hailed as a miracle pesticide. It wiped out mosquitoes, kept crops clean, and saved countless lives from malaria. But by the late 60s and early 70s, the miracle had turned monster. DDT didn't just kill pests, it stuck around, in soil, in water, in animals. It bioaccumulated, climbing the food chain, growing stronger with each step. And by the time it reached top predators like bald eagles, it was thinning eggshells and threatening entire species. Americans were slow to react at first. It wasn't until Rachel Carson's groundbreaking book Silent Spring 1962 that public awareness started to shift. By the 1970s, the environmental movement was gaining real traction. Activists, scientists, and even everyday families began pushing for a ban. The EPA banned DDT in in 1972. It was a major win for conservation and a turning point in how we viewed the cost of chemical solutions. But let's be honest, some households still had old cans in their sheds for years afterward. Nothing screams Grandpa's garage like a rusty DDT can next to a mason jar of screws. My take: killing bugs is fine. Killing eagles, fish, and future generations, maybe not so much. 5. Shoe-fitting X-ray machines. Step right up and get irradiated. Remember going shoe shopping as a kid? If you grew up before the mid-1970s, you might have stuck your feet into a strange wooden box with a green screen and seen your bones. Welcome to the shoe-fitting fluoroscope, a device that blasted your feet with X-rays to show if your new shoes fit just right. Sounds fancy, right? Well, they were everywhere. In department stores, family shops, even local cobblers. Kids loved it. Parents trusted it. Salespeople thought it was cutting edge. What no one realized, these machines leaked radiation like a busted microwave, often directly at eye level for children. There were no proper safety regulations, and the machines weren't regularly calibrated. Some models emitted radiation doses 100 times what's considered safe today. By the 1950s, medical experts raised red flags. But it wasn't until the early 1970s that most saw. States started banning them, some reluctantly, after lawsuits. Still, for many boomers, the memory is real, that little thrill of watching your toes wiggle on a screen while your DNA quietly protested. My take: we risked permanent cell damage to see if our sneakers were snug, and somehow, we're still here. 6. Mercury thermometers. Shake it, break it, poison your house. If you were sick in the 1970s, someone probably stuck a long glass stick under your tongue and told you, don't bite down. Why? Because that thermometer was filled with liquid mercury, a neurotoxin that, once spilled, could poison your whole kitchen. Mercury thermometers were everywhere, cheap, accurate, and totally normal until they broke, which, let's face it, happened often. When one shattered, silver droplets rolled across the floor like magic. Kids chased them. Adults ignored them. Ventilation hazmat suits. Please. We wiped it up with tissues and hoped for the best. The public's attitude was casual, at best. It wasn't until the late 70s and early 80s that concerns about mercury exposure and vapor toxicity became mainstream. Children, pregnant women, and infants were particularly at risk. Mercury can affect the nervous system, brain development, and motor skills. But hey, at least it looked cool while ruining your health. Most schools and hospitals began phasing them out in the 1980s. The U.S. formally banned sale of mercury thermometers for consumer use in 2001, but by then, the damage was done, and many homes still had one in a dusty drawer. My take: great for measuring fevers. Terrible if dropped. Even worse if your brother tried to play with it like a lava lamp. 7. Lead paint. Bright colors. dull minds. In the 1970s, lead paint was everywhere, on walls, toys, furniture, cribs, and even lunchboxes. Why? Because it was cheap, vibrant, and long-lasting. That fire engine red or canary yellow you remember from your childhood bedroom? Yep, probably full of lead. For decades, nobody questioned it. Lead made paint dry faster, resist moisture, and keep colors bold. But under that glossy finish was a ticking time bomb, especially for kids. Children exposed to lead, often by chewing on painted surfaces or inhaling dust, faced severe developmental problems, decreased IQ, behavioral disorders, learning disabilities, in extreme cases, even seizures or coma, in poor and inner-city communities, where old housing stock dominated, the crisis hit hardest. By the 1970s, scientists had mountains of data linking lead exposure to neurological damage. But industry groups pushed back hard, saying more research was needed. Classic playbook. Public awareness finally tipped in the mid-1970s thanks to activism, medical studies, and some very angry parents. The U.S. government officially banned lead-based paint for residential use in 1978, but by then, millions of homes were already coated in the stuff. My take, sure, the colors were beautiful, but so are crayons, and we don't lick walls full of those either. 8. Leaded gasoline. Brain damage at every red light. There was a time when the smell of gasoline meant summer, freedom, and neurotoxins. In the 1970s, leaded gasoline was the norm. Tetraethyl lead was added to improve engine performance and reduce knocking. It worked. But every time you filled up or idled in traffic, you were releasing airborne lead into the environment. Lead particles settled in soil near highways, playgrounds, and schools. Kids played in it. People breathed it. And the consequences were brutal, especially for developing brains. Despite mounting evidence, oil companies fought regulation tooth and nail. They funded research saying lead was safe, blamed poor parenting for behavioral issues, and even discredited scientists. Still, by the mid-1970s, the truth became undeniable. The EPA began phasing out leaded gas in 1975, mandating catalytic converters in new cars. Complete bans took years. It wasn't until 1996 that leaded fuel was fully banned for on-road vehicles in the U.S. My take. We used to poison ourselves daily just to avoid engine knocking. Now we know better, and our kids' report cards thank us. And that's just part 1. Stay tuned for even more dangerously dumb inventions, including toys that doubled as weapons and hairdryers filled with asbestos. If you survived the 1970s without glowing, combusting, or coughing up lead dust, consider yourself lucky, and maybe a little radioactive.
Welcome back to Retro USA Memories, where nostalgia meets danger and sometimes explodes. In today's episode, we're heading back into the house. Not just any house, a 1970s home where toys could maim you and hairdryers might quietly kill you. Buckle your bell bottoms, because these are 9 more banned inventions from the 70s that prove safety was optional. 1. Asbestos hairdryers, style now. Sickness later. Selling quality dryers at home were all the rage. Big plastic domes you'd park your head under for 45 minutes while flipping through TV Guide. What nobody realized, many of them were insulated with asbestos, right where your face went. Asbestos was cheap, heat-resistant, and extremely carcinogenic. It wasn't until a 1979 FDA study found dangerously high levels in handheld and hooded hairdryers that the public freaked out. Manufacturers quickly phased them out by the early 80s, but not before years of exposure. Fun fact, asbestos wasn't just in dryers, it was in floor tiles, insulation, even fake fireplace snow. 2. Lawn darts jarts, the backyard weapon of choice. Yes. The beloved lawn dart, a foot-long metal-tipped missile marketed as a family game. Just toss it toward a plastic ring and try not to hit your cousin in the skull. These were shockingly popular in the 1970s. But emergency rooms started noticing a pattern head trauma, eye injuries, even deaths. By 1988, after several child fatalities and pressure from consumer safety groups, finally banned them. Ironically, adults loved them for their accuracy, and kids loved them for how far they could throw. M80s and homemade explosives. Legalish fireworks from hell. In the 70s, you didn't need a permit to blow your fingers off just an older cousin and a trip across state lines. M80s, originally military-grade training explosives, were sold under the counter or as novelty items. People used them to launch mailboxes into orbit, vaporize pumpkins, or just see what would happen. By the late 70s, after thousands of injuries and some gruesome deaths, the U.S. banned M80s and other unregulated homemade explosives under federal law. Electric blankets with no auto shutoff. Toasty or toasted. Snuggling up with an electric blanket was peak comfort in winter. But early models had no shutoff, faulty wiring, and sometimes caught fire while people slept. In the 1970s, house fires linked to blankets soared. The problem: people left them on all night, folded them tightly, damaging the wires, or used aging units without realizing the danger. By the early 1980s, UL safety standards were introduced requiring auto shutoff and better insulation. Gas space heaters, silent killers. These boxy little heaters looked harmless, but often lacked proper ventilation, leading to carbon monoxide poisoning, a silent, odorless gas that could knock you out in minutes. In the 70s, they were in millions of homes, trailers, and cabins. People loved the heat, but CO deaths quietly climbed. After multiple lawsuits and public service campaigns, most models were banned or redesigned by the mid-1980s. 6. Flammable children's pajamas, now in ignitable polyester. In the name of fashion, many kids' pajamas in the 1970s were made from untreated polyester blends, soft, colorful, and highly flammable. Fires from space heaters or cigarettes could turn these pajamas into melting napalm on a child's skin. After numerous incidents, the U.S. introduced the Flammable Fabrics Act amendments in 1972, requiring sleepwear to meet new flammability standards. Aerosol, sprays with toxic propellants. From deodorants to whipped cream cans, aerosol sprays were everywhere, and so were their toxic propellants like butane and CFCs. Aside from the ozone damage, Many sprays in the 70s were highly flammable. Some teenagers huffed them for a quick high. Others accidentally turned their bathrooms into mini fireballs. By the late 70s, CFCs were banned in sprays, and many household aerosol formulas were reformulated. Popcorn makers that could explode. These plug-in popcorn poppers seemed innocent until the plastic lids warped from heat or oil built up, causing violent eruptions of hot butter and kernels, burns, countertop fires, and the occasional popcorn projectile injury led to redesigns and recalls in the early 80s. One brand even got pulled after reports of the lid shattering mid-pop. Tris treated children's clothes, flame retardant, but cancerous. Tris was a flame retardant chemical used on children's clothes in the early 1970s. The idea: prevent burns. The reality: Tris is a mutagen and probable carcinogen absorbed through the skin. By 1977, studies showed Tris could cause DNA damage. Parents were outraged. Manufacturers scrambled. The U.S. banned Tris in children's garments in 1978, though it showed up later in other products like furniture foam. And there you have it, a whole house full of dangers, brought to you by the 1970s. From flying darts to toxic pajamas. It's a miracle we made it through childhood at all. If you enjoyed this time travel through chaos, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Retro USA Memories. We've still got one more episode, and trust us, the worst is yet to come.
Welcome back to Retro USA Memories, where we love the 70s, even the parts that nearly exploded, melted, or mutated us. In part 3 of our Banned Inventions series, we're leaving the house and heading into the world of big business and big mistakes. Buckle up, preferably not in a turbine-powered car. Cigarette ads targeting kids, cool, colorful, criminal. In the 1970s, cigarette companies still advertised freely, on TV, billboards, even cartoon mascots. Brands like Kool and Camel used colorful characters, sports tie-ins, and even free toys to attract teens. Ads showed doctors recommending brands or cool kids lighting up behind the school. The backlash grew quickly, led by parents, teachers, and public health advocates. The Public Health Cigarette Smoking Act banned cigarette ads on TV and radio in 1971, but print ads aimed at youth persisted into the 80s. Toy chemistry sets with real uranium. Yes, in the 1970s, certain toy chemistry kits actually included uranium ore samples. Companies like Gilbert sold atomic energy labs in earlier decades, but vintage stock circulated into the 70s via garage sales and collector catalogs. These kits let kids measure radiation with Geiger counters, build cloud chambers, and feel like mini-scientists, all while handling radioactive material. By the late 70s, such sets were pulled due to rising nuclear fears, and federal restrictions were tightened under the Atomic Energy Act. Fun? Yes. Safe. Let's just say no modern toy comes with a radiation warning label. Ephedra and Fen-Phen, diet pills with a deadly price. In the battle against belly fat, the 1970s gave us ephedra, a natural stimulant that promised energy, appetite suppression, and fast weight loss. It worked, a little too well. Ephedra raised heart rate, blood pressure, and risk of heart attacks, strokes, and sudden death. Paired with other drugs like fenfluramine in the infamous fen-phen combo, it became a lethal mix. Despite red flags, it was heavily marketed, especially to women. The FDA banned fen-phen in 1997 and ephedra for supplements in 2004. Weight loss isn't worth a heart explosion. Just eat fewer Twinkies. Carbon tetrachloride, the cleaner that cleaned you out. This industrial cleaning solvent was a staple in homes and factories. It removed stains, degreased metal, and even worked in fire extinguishers. Problem? It was highly toxic, especially when inhaled or absorbed through the skin. It damaged the liver, kidneys, and nervous system, and was a probable human carcinogen. It took years of workplace poisonings and animal studies to convince regulators. By the mid-1980s, carbon tetrachloride was largely banned for consumer use. If your cleaning product needs a hazmat suit, maybe stick with vinegar. Lead-lined lunchboxes, tastes like heavy metal. It sounds insane now, but some insulated lunchboxes in the 1970s used lead-lined vinyl to keep food cool. Tests later found that lead could leach into sandwiches, especially when heated in the sun. Kids absorbed it by touch or ingestion, with all the classic symptoms: learning delays, behavioral issues, and organ damage. By the early 1980s, new safety standards banned lead from lunchboxes, toys, and food containers. Chrysler turbine car, the jet that never took off. It looked like the future, sleek, powerful, and powered by a jet engine. Literally. The Chrysler turbine car was introduced in the early 1960s, but lingered in testing through the 1970s. It could run on anything flammable: gasoline, kerosene, even tequila, allegedly. People were thrilled until they actually drove it. It roared like a jet, had dangerously high exhaust temperatures, guzzled fuel, and polluted like a factory. Worse, its turbine parts were incredibly expensive to replace. Public interest faded fast. Chrysler recalled and scrapped most units by 1979. Today, only a few remain in museums. Fun to test, terrifying to park in a garage. PCBs, toxic coolants in every transformer. Polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, were used in coolants, paints, sealants, and electronics. Fire-resistant and chemically stable, they seemed like an industrial dream. But they didn't break down. Ever. And they leaked into rivers, soil, and eventually human fat cells. By the 1970s, workers were reporting liver issues, rashes, and neurological symptoms. Scientists found PCBs in breast milk, wildlife, even Arctic ice. The U.S. banned PCB production in 1979, but cleanup efforts continue today. Some contaminated sites are still labeled toxic zones. If your product ends up in polar bears, maybe rethink your formula. Gasoline cans without safety nozzles. Before safety spouts and child-proof caps, gas cans were metal or plastic jugs with open tops, prone to spills, vapor buildup, and fires. One spark could ignite the fumes. Children drank from them. Adults used them near grills. Thousands of accidents were reported yearly. By the early 90s, new regulations required spill-proof spouts and safer storage designs. But the 70s were a flammable free-for-all. So that wraps up Part 3, the end of our trilogy of terrifying tech. From jet cars to radioactive toys, the 1970s proved that innovation sometimes runs faster than common sense. If you survived this era without glowing, combusting, or getting lead poisoning from your sandwich, you deserve a medal. Subscribe to Retro USA Memories for more blasts from the unsafe past, and don't forget to share your wildest memories in the comments.
laughed, we danced, we wore glitter and polyester like armor. Yet somehow, the strangest joys of the 1970s quietly vanished while we weren't looking. What weird little wonders did we lose? And why does remembering them feel like coming home to a life we forgot we loved? Avocado green and harvest gold appliances. They were not just colors, they were a mood, a way of life, a national obsession. If your family had a refrigerator, oven, or even a stand mixer in the 1970s, chances are it was proudly painted in avocado green or harvest gold. These colors seeped into American homes like smoke through an open window. They were earthy, comforting, and oddly futuristic, like they belonged in your grandmother's farmhouse and on a spaceship at the same time. If you grew up opening a harvest gold refrigerator to grab a can of orange soda, you remember how right it felt, even if it clashed with everything else in the room. That avocado green stove wasn't just where your parents cooked dinner, it's where you waited to hear the pop of the popcorn. That color wasn't a design choice, it was the background of your life. What makes it funny now is how seriously everyone took it, how confidently we wrapped our whole kitchens in two shades that looked like mustard and guacamole got in a fight. Clogs, they clacked, they thudded. They echoed across school hallways and suburban sidewalks like someone dropped a toolbox full of maracas. Clogs were not just shoes, they were the sound of the 1970s growing louder with every step. Imported in spirit from the Netherlands, but reimagined in American malls, these wooden-soled shoes made fashion louder, literally. Kids wore them, parents wore them, teachers wore them, and then regretted it halfway through the school day. There was no sneaking around in clogs. They announced you like a drum line at a parade. They were sturdy, comfortable if you got used to them. And they felt weirdly rebellious. Maybe they were impractical. Maybe they didn't match anything you owned. But they looked good with bell bottoms. The fun is how seriously we took them. Like wearing a chunk of painted wood strapped to your foot was the height of elegance. TV dinners. TV dinners were more than food. They were a revolution in a foil tray. You'd pull one from the freezer, peel back the corner, and 25 minutes later, you had dinner, kind of. The mashed potatoes were crusty on one side and icy on the other. The gravy had merged with the corn, and that chocolate brownie in the corner was a molten rock capable of scorching the roof of your mouth until Tuesday. But none of that mattered, because you got to eat on a metal tray in the living room while watching All in the Family. TV dinners gave families a strange kind of freedom, the freedom to be alone, together. The funny part is how futuristic they felt, even though they were never that good. We laugh now, but we kept buying them because they gave us time. And back then, that was worth more than taste. Beaded door curtains. Walk through one, and you were instantly transported into another room, another vibe, another world. Beaded door curtains were not just home decor, they were portals. One second you were in the hallway, the next you were in your older sister's bedroom, where incense was burning and David Bowie was staring from the wall like a glittery prophet. The soft clatter of beads colliding became a soundtrack all its own. And you could never sneak through them, no matter how hard you tried. They were the tattletales of the 1970s. They were made of bamboo, little wooden cylinders. Beaded curtains promised something magical, something adult, something groovy. The funny thing is, how useless they were at actually dividing rooms or providing privacy. But who cared? In a time when your bedroom was your castle, beaded curtains were your drawbridge. Latch hook rugs. It started with a blank mesh canvas, a plastic hook, and a tangle of brightly colored yarn that somehow always ended up in knots. To a kid, or even a bored adult in the 1970s, latch hook rugs were more than just crafts. They were a challenge, a hobby, a rainy day savior. Maybe it was a rainbow, a unicorn, or a cartoon tiger. Either way, the finished product hung on your wall with pride. You made it. You hooked every tuft. You stabbed that canvas like a warrior with a mission. There was something almost meditative about it, something calming in the repetition, pulling strand after strand through the mesh while the Brady Bunch played in the background. Looking back, it's funny how latch hook rugs turned an entire generation into tiny weavers with zero idea what they were doing. Roller disco. Roller disco was not just a hobby, it was a way of becoming someone else for a night. You laced up your skates like you were putting on a costume, stepped into that pulsating rink, and suddenly you were untouchable. The music was always booming. Donna Summer, Chic, the Bee Gees, and the disco ball spun like a lighthouse, a guidepost, a disco deity above your head. The outfits were louder than the music. Metallic pants, crop tops, rainbow suspenders. You didn't have to be good, you just had to be in. And when the whole rink skated to the beat, it felt like the world was healing itself, one backward crossover at a time. The funny part is, most of us fell more than we skated, but no one cared. You'd laugh, crawl back up, and keep going because the floor was freedom. Rabbit ear antennas. Television in the 1970s wasn't just something you watched, it was something you adjusted, wrestled, and pleaded with. Every household had rabbit ears, those spindly metal antennas perched like insect limbs on top of the TV. If the picture went fuzzy, you didn't call for help, you got up. You grabbed the antennas like you were performing some ancient ritual. You waved them in the air, you wrapped them in foil, or jammed a wire hanger in there just to get the evening news. And when the signal came in, crystal clear, everyone in the room would freeze. Don't breathe. Don't move. Just let it play. It was a shared experience, with one person crouched behind the set while another yelled, "It's better! No, wait, go back!" The funny part is, it worked just enough to keep us trying. This wasn't passive viewing, it was active survival, and you felt like you earned that episode. Beanbag chairs. Beanbag chairs were anti-furniture. They didn't care about structure, design, or lumbar support. They just wanted you to plop down, sink in, and forget your bones existed. They came in colors that didn't match anything: burnt orange, pea green, electric blue, and textures that felt like cheap dreams, usually vinyl, sometimes velvet, always squeaky. You didn't sit on a beanbag, you disappeared into it. For kids, they were a throne. For teens, a nest. For adults, a regrettable purchase they kept anyway. They were rebellion in blob form. The funny part? They were impossible to get out of gracefully. You didn't stand, you rolled, you crawled, you clawed at the air like you were escaping quicksand. Pet rocks. Pet rocks were the most absurd, brilliant, and completely sincere product of the 1970s. Imagine walking into a store and buying a rock. Not a toy that looked like a rock, an actual rock. And your new pet came in a box with straw bedding and a care manual. In a world spiraling through inflation, war, and cultural tension, Americans collectively decided to laugh by adopting a rock. The genius was not the object, but the moment. For a few dollars, you bought not just the item, but the idea that maybe life didn't need to be so serious. Why did something so silly feel like the most comforting purchase of the decade? That's a question only the 70s can answer. Clackers. Clackers were dangerous, but that just made them better. Two acrylic spheres tethered by string, daring you to swing them so perfectly they'd smack together in a perfect rhythm. When you got it right, magic. When you didn't, bruises. Every playground in the 1970s echoed with the unmistakable clack, clack, clack of kids testing their reflexes and pushing their luck. There were no rules, no instructions, just noise and adrenaline. They were banned in some schools and feared by parents, but that only added to their mystique. You weren't just playing, you were proving something. You had skills, or at least you were brave enough to try. The funny part is, we kept buying them, breaking them, and begging for more. Clackers weren't safe, but they were unforgettable. From avocado green kitchens to the clatter of clogs in the hallway, these weren't just things. They were the wonderfully weird, surprisingly profound, and hilariously funny background of our lives. They were the moments we shared, the fads we followed, and the memories that make us smile today. What funny thing from the 70s do you remember most? If this video took you back, hit like it, drop your favorite memory in the comments, and subscribe before the ice cream truck disappears down the block. Thanks for watching.
The 1970s. It was a decade of bold fashion and even bolder ideas. While we were all listening to rock and roll on the radio, a quiet revolution was happening in labs and workshops across the country. Engineers and dreamers were building gadgets that seemed to be pulled straight out of science fiction. These weren't just inventions. They were promises of a future we could only imagine. Today, we're dusting off these forgotten marvels to explore 10 gadgets from the 1970s that were truly, remarkably ahead of their time. The Sebring Vanguard City Car, 1974. Amidst the gas-guzzling muscle cars of the 1970s and the backdrop of a major energy crisis, a small company in Florida had a radical idea: a car that didn't use a single drop of gasoline. The Sebring Vanguard City Car, introduced in 1974, was a pioneering electric vehicle far ahead of its time. It was impossible to miss. This compact, wedge-shaped car looked like a piece of cheese on wheels. It had a lightweight fiberglass body and was powered by a tiny 3.5 horsepower electric motor. Its top speed was only about 38 miles per hour, and it had a range of around 40 miles per charge, making it strictly for short urban commutes. Priced at around $3,000, the city car appealed to a niche market of environmentally conscious consumers and people just looking to save money on gas. While it might seem like a joke today, the city car was a serious attempt at solving a real problem. Over 2,300 units were sold by the time production ceased in 1977, which, believe it or not, made it the most produced American electric car until the modern era of Tesla and other EVs. It was a quirky, slow, and somewhat strange-looking vehicle, but it proved that electric cars were not just a fantasy. The city car was the little engine that couldn't go very far or very fast, but it was the first vehicle to whisper a question that the whole world is shouting today. What if we just plugged it in? The Motorola Dynatac, 1973. In 1973, a Motorola engineer named Martin Cooper stood on a New York City street and made the world's first public call from a handheld, portable telephone. The device he used was the Motorola Dynatac, a prototype of what would become the first commercially available cell phone a decade later. This wasn't just a gadget, it was a paradigm shift. For the first time in human history, you could make a phone call without being tethered by a cord. The Dynatac was enormous by today's standards. It weighed nearly 2.5 pounds and was over 10 inches long, earning it the nickname the Brick. It offered just 30 minutes of talk time after a staggering 10 hours of charging. When it finally hit the market in 1983, it was the ultimate status symbol. The price tag was a jaw-dropping $4,000, which is roughly $12,000 today. It was a luxury item for wealthy financiers and businessmen. Despite the cost and limitations, it was a glimpse into a completely untethered future. The idea that you could be reached anywhere or make a call from anywhere was pure science fiction come to life. While only the very rich could afford it, the Dynatac proved that the concept of a personal portable phone was viable, setting the stage for the mobile revolution that would eventually connect the entire planet. The Motorola Dynatac was less a phone and more a piece of concrete with an antenna, but it was the piece of concrete that changed the world forever. The Bell System Picture Phone, 1970. Imagine it's 1970. For your entire life, the telephone has been a device for sound only. Suddenly, you hear about a machine that lets you see the person you're talking to in real time. This wasn't a futuristic movie prop. This was the Bell System Picture Phone. Introduced commercially after being teased at the 1964 New York World's Fair, the Picture Phone was a monumental leap in communication. It promised to connect families across miles and to revolutionize business meetings. The technology itself was astounding for the era, transmitting both video and audio over phone lines. However, living in the future came with a hefty price tag. The service cost $160 per month, which is over $1,200 in today's money. And that didn't even include per-minute charges for your calls. The equipment was also incredibly bulky, and you could only call other people who also had a picture phone, of which there were very few. Bell only managed to sell about 500 units, mostly to large corporations in cities like New York and Chicago. It was a commercial failure, but a spectacular one. It failed not because the idea was bad, but because the world simply wasn't ready for it. The network infrastructure, the cost, the culture. It would all take another 30 to 40 years to catch up. The picture phone was a beautiful, lonely prophet. It showed us a future of video calls that we now live in every day. But it arrived at the party decades too early, with no one to talk to. The Kodak digital camera prototype, 1975. In 1975, while the world was still in love with film, a young engineer at Eastman Kodak named Steve Sasson quietly invented the future, and in doing so, planted the seeds of his own company's eventual demise. He created the world's first true digital camera. This wasn't a sleek, pocket-sized device. It was a bulky contraption, the size of a toaster, weighing a hefty 8 pounds. It captured black and white photos with a resolution of just 0.01 megapixels onto a standard cassette tape. The process was painstakingly slow. It took 23 seconds just to capture a single image. To view the photo, you had to take the cassette out of the camera and place it into a custom playback device connected to a television. It was clunky, it was slow, but it was magic. It was the first time an image had been captured without a single strip of film. When Sasson presented his invention to Kodak executives, their reaction was lukewarm. Their main question was, why would anyone ever want to look at their pictures on a television? They were so deeply invested in their lucrative film business that they failed to see the revolution they held in their hands. The prototype was never sold publicly, but its existence laid the groundwork for the entire digital photography industry that would eventually make Kodak's film business obsolete. Kodak didn't just invent the first digital camera. They invented their own kryptonite and then locked it away in a closet, hoping no one would ever find it. The Sony Betamax, 1975. In the mid-1970s, a war was brewing in living rooms across America. It was a battle for the future of home entertainment, and the two combatants were Sony's Betamax and JVC's VHS. Launched in 1975 with the SL7200 recorder, Betamax was, by most technical accounts, the superior format. It offered a sharper picture, better color fidelity, and more robust sound quality. Early adopters and tech enthusiasts swore by it. Owning a Betamax felt like you were part of an exclusive club that valued quality above all else. It allowed you to record television programs, revolutionizing how people watched TV. For the first time, you weren't a slave to the network's schedule. So why did it lose? The answer is a classic lesson in business strategy. The primary reason was recording time. Early Betamax tapes could only record for 1 hour, while VHS launched with a 2-hour capacity, long enough for a full movie. While Sony eventually increased Betamax's time, the damage was done. Furthermore, VHS machines were generally cheaper, and JVC wisely licensed its technology to any manufacturer who wanted it, creating a flood of affordable VCRs. Video rental stores, seeing more VHS players in homes, stocked more VHS tapes, creating a feedback loop that slowly starved Betamax out of the market. By the late 1980s, the war was over. Betamax was the brilliant, talented artist who refused to compromise, while VHS was the savvy pop star who gave the people exactly what they wanted. In the end, convenience and a longer runtime won the war. The Atari Home Pong console, 1975. Before complex graphics, before sprawling open worlds, before online multiplayer, there was Pong. Just 2 white paddles, a single square ball, and a beep-boop sound that echoed through living rooms across America. In 1975, Atari took its smash hit arcade game and brought it home with the Home Pong console. Priced at just under $100, it was an instant sensation, selling over 150,000 units in its first holiday season alone. It was a simple, elegant piece of technology that did one thing, and did it perfectly. The magic of Home Pong was its accessibility. Anyone could understand it in seconds. Your dad, your little sister, your grandparents. Everyone could grab one of the built-in paddles and start playing. It turned the family television from a passive screen for watching shows into an active, interactive playground. It was the spark that ignited the entire home video game industry. The success of Pong demonstrated that there was a massive, untapped market for playing games at home, leading directly to the creation of cartridge-based systems like the Atari 2600. For an entire generation, that simple game of electronic tennis was their very first video game experience, their first taste of digital competition, and the start of a lifelong love of gaming. Pong wasn't just a game, it was the big bang of home entertainment, a simple digital heartbeat that proved you could find endless joy in just trying to hit a square. The Sony Walkman, 1979. Before the Sony Walkman was introduced in 1979, music was either a public experience, blasted from a boombox, or a private one, confined to your living room stereo. The idea of a personal, high-quality soundtrack for your life walking down the street, riding the bus, sitting in the park wasn't really a thing. The Walkman changed all of that, and it changed it overnight. This tiny, portable cassette player, with its iconic orange foam headphones, was a revolution in a box. For around $150, it offered a listening experience that was both private and mobile. Suddenly, you were the DJ of your own life. The Walkman became the ultimate tool for teenagers, creating the perfect mixtape for their crush, for joggers keeping a beat, for commuters finding a moment of peace on a crowded train. It was more than a gadget. It became a cultural icon, a symbol of freedom, independence, and individuality. It sold over 200 million units worldwide, fundamentally altering our relationship with music. It proved that people craved a personal space, a soundtrack that belonged only to them. The Walkman was the direct ancestor of the Discman, the MP3 player, and the smartphone in your pocket today. It didn't just let you listen to music, it let you carry your world with you. The Walkman was the gadget that finally put a bubble around your head and filled it with your favorite songs. And for a generation, that bubble was the greatest place on Earth. The Polaroid SX70 camera, 1972. What could be more thrilling than watching a memory appear right in the palm of your hand? In an era when photography meant waiting days to get your film developed, the Polaroid SX70, introduced in 1972, felt like actual magic. This was not your typical boxy Polaroid camera. The SX70 was a marvel of engineering, a single-lens reflex, SLR camera that could fold down into a compact, elegant rectangle, small enough to fit in a coat pocket. It was wrapped in leather and brushed chrome, looking as much like a luxury item as a camera. When you took a picture, the camera would eject a blank white card with a soft mechanical whir. Then, the magic would happen. Right before your eyes, an image would slowly emerge from the blankness, blooming into full color. This wasn't just convenient, it was an event. It made photography spontaneous, social, and wonderfully imperfect. At birthday parties, road trips, and family gatherings, the SX70 became part of the moment itself, not just a tool to document it. Priced at around $180 at launch, it was a significant purchase, but millions were sold to people captivated by its blend of high technology and instant gratification. The SX70 didn't just take a picture, it gave you a tiny, tangible piece of the past you could hold in your hand, a warm, physical memory in a world that was about to go digital. The Texas Instruments Speak and Spell, 1978. Did you ever sit cross-legged on the carpet, pressing buttons on a toy that actually talked back to you? In 1978, Texas Instruments released the Speak and Spell, and it became an instant icon in the world of educational toys. Priced at around $50, this bright orange, futuristic-looking device was one of the very first to use a single-chip speech synthesizer. At its heart was a pioneering technology that could transform written text into spoken words with an unmistakably robotic, yet charming tone. Its primary function was to help children improve their spelling through various games, asking them to spell words and giving cheerful electronic feedback. Before the Speak and Spell, learning was mostly done by memorizing from a page. This device made it interactive, responsive, and engaging. You weren't just reading, you were having a conversation with a machine. Its success was staggering, selling over 1 million units in its first year alone, and becoming a staple in households and classrooms throughout the 1980s. It wasn't just a toy. For many kids, it was their very first hands-on encounter with technology that felt intelligent, sparking a curiosity for computers and coding that would define the next generation. Its cameo in the 1982 movie E.T. the Extraterrestrial only cemented its place in pop culture history. The Speak and Spell was the friendly robot tutor we all needed, teaching us how to spell onomatopoeia, one robotic syllable at a time. The digital wristwatch, 1972. In the early 1970s, telling time was an analog affair of sweeping hands and ticking sounds. Then, in 1972, the Hamilton Watch Company released the Pulsar P1, and the future arrived on the world's wrist. This wasn't just a new watch, it was a new way of seeing time itself. The Pulsar was a solid-state digital watch with no moving parts. To see the time, you had to press a button, which would cause glowing red LED numerals to light up on the dark crystal screen. It felt like something straight out of a spy movie. It was also incredibly expensive. The initial limited edition model cost a staggering $2,100, equivalent to over $15,000 today, making it a luxury item for the rich and famous. Soon after, however, LCD, liquid crystal display, technology was introduced, allowing for a continuous time display that didn't drain the battery. This innovation, championed by companies like Seiko and Casio, brought the price crashing down. By the mid-1970s, affordable digital watches were everywhere, and they became a full-blown craze. Millions were sold throughout the decade. For the first time, people had access to hyper-accurate time at a glance. The digital watch was a symbol of the new electronic age, precise, modern, and undeniably cool. The first digital watches made telling time an event. You didn't just glance at your wrist. You made a grand announcement to the world that you were living in the future, one glowing red number at a time. Which of these gadgets felt like the future to you? Share your memories in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more trips down memory lane.
The 1970s, a decade of bold style and fearless innovation. But let's be honest, not every bright idea back then struck gold. Some fizzled out spectacularly. Get ready for a trip down memory lane as we look back at some of the 70s most unforgettable commercial fails. Bell Picture Phone. Bell Telephone, who later became known as AT&T, built a prototype telephone called the Model 1 Picture Phone at the 1964 World's Fair. A few of these were operational throughout the 1960s. In 1970, Bell introduced its first commercial picture phone, but the service never really caught on. They charged $160 per month for the equipment and the service, plus a fee per minute on calls. That would be at least $1.2 per month in today's money, and that's if you never used it. The other downside of this piece of technology was that it was only intended to be used for person-to-person calls, and not full rooms of people like you might see on Skype. They tried to expand the service and even came out with a Model 2. But ultimately, they pulled the plug on it in 1972. In March of 2019, a pair of Model 2 picture phones sold for $7,575 at a New York auction. For that price, you'd expect it to at least predict lottery numbers, not just show you who you were avoiding. Polaroid Polavision. Polaroid dominated the instant photography market decades before the digital camera ever did. Following the success of the SX70 and one-step cameras, Polaroid decided to enter the home movie market in 1977. This market had been dominated by one of their competitors, which was Kodak and their Super 8 film. The Polaroid Polavision was designed to use a cartridge which resembled a small video cassette. It could be exposed and then developed in just minutes. The captured images could then be viewed on a special tabletop viewer, or if you remove the reel of film from the inside, then it could be shown on any Super 8 projector. The only problem was Polavision was a flop, and it never really became as popular as their film cameras. You had to shoot in very bright light, colors were flat and muddy, and they couldn't record sound the way that Super 8 cameras could. This became Polaroid's first commercial failure, and they ceased production in 1979. Today, you can find these cameras listed on eBay anywhere from $25 to $100. Instant home movies with no sound and muddy colors. Sounds like a perfect recipe for a nap. Sansui Quadraphonic Sound. The Sansui Quadraphonic Sound was a 4-channel home audio system that was completely different from the 2-speaker system that people had in the early 70s. Musicians had been experimenting with 4-channel recording since the late 60s. But Sansui was the first electronics maker to develop and sell the quadraphonic amplifier for the home market in 1972. It sold for $200, which is about $1,200 today. Other competitors also introduced quadraphonic systems, and some had joystick controllers which allowed listeners to shift the audio balance from left to right and front to back so that they could find that perfect sound. Record companies loved the idea, and some of the biggest names like Aerosmith, Eric Clapton, the Eagles, and many more released albums mixed for 4-channel stereos. But many consumers couldn't justify buying a new receiver for 2 additional speakers, and the concept ended in 1978. The music industry then moved on to digital recording, which was the next best thing in the market. These old quadraphonic receivers can still sell for around $200 if they are in working condition. 4 speakers to blast disco in your living room. Your neighbors must have loved that. Clairol yogurt shampoo. The 1970s saw a trend of incorporating natural food ingredients like lemon, honey, and other herbs into beauty and hygiene products. Clairol decided to up the game with yogurt shampoo in 1979. You know, because everyone wanted that healthy hair. Turns out, the company was completely wrong. Many consumers were confused about what they had purchased, and some people even tried eating it. Is it for my hair or my breakfast? A question no one should have to ask about their shampoo. Laserdisc. The Laserdisc was essentially a predecessor to the DVD. It was introduced in 1978 and offered consumers higher picture quality and sound than VHS tapes. However, they seemed to have more drawbacks than benefits. One of the biggest was the fact that you couldn't record on them. They were also pretty expensive. They hung on for a little while and then tried to make a comeback in the 1990s. But they ultimately failed for good when the DVD came on strong. Big, expensive, and couldn't record your favorite shows. The Laserdisc, a movie lover's very fancy frisbee. Speaking of things that didn't quite stick the landing, if you're enjoying these blasts from the past, why not give this video a like? And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more trips down memory lane. We dig up all sorts of forgotten gems and duds. Sony Betamax. Betamax was introduced by Sony in 1975, which was 1 year before JVC introduced the VHS tape. Betamax had superior resolution and sound quality, which was why it remained a choice of different media outlets for decades. The problem with Betamax was that Sony refrained from licensing its technology to other manufacturers, which limited the variety of movies that were available on this format. Meanwhile, JVC licensed its VHS technology to any manufacturer that was interested. Betamax's share of the VCR market fell from 100% in 1975 to 10% by 1988, and it continued to dwindle in the following years. Betamax, the king of quality who forgot to invite anyone to the party. VHS just let everyone in. Gerber singles. In 1974, the baby food giant Gerber came up with a new idea. Why not create baby food for adults? They believed that there would be a market for this, and they couldn't be more wrong. Adults were never fond of the mushy meat and food, and Gerber's singles failed horribly, because nothing says sophisticated adult meal like strained peas in a tiny jar. Bon appetit? Downy Flakes Toaster Eggs. Downy Flakes toaster eggs were introduced in 1972. They looked like some sort of frisbee or hockey puck. They were hoping to capitalize on the popularity of other products like Pop-Tarts. But by 1975, they were removed from the store shelves. Toaster eggs that looked like hockey pucks. Maybe the goal was to make breakfast a contact sport. World Football League. Over the years, there have been several attempts to compete against the NFL. In 1974, the World Football League hit the field. It made it through one full season in 1974 and most of the second season when the whole idea fumbled. Their hopes of world football domination never really made it past 13 teams, one of which being in Honolulu, Hawaii. The World Football League, ambitious name, slightly less worldwide results. Aloha to that dream. Swing bike. The swing bike was a bicycle that allowed the rider to steer the front wheel and the rear wheel. The design was patented by Ralph Belden in 1974, and it was sold on the market in 1975. They really weren't meant for transportation as much as they were for looking cool and doing stunts. It had a second steering wheel axis in front of the seat. You could ride with one wheel on the curb and the other one in the road in sort of an S shape. The bike was somewhat difficult to steer, which meant that it was easier to fall and get hurt. It was discontinued in 1978. The swing bike. Today, most of these products aren't much more than a memory. Very few of them have ever survived the trash dump. But if you happen to have some of these and you're willing to sell them, then perhaps you can make a pretty penny on eBay. Can you think of any other failures from the 1970s that we missed? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing about the gadgets and gizmos.
To Sony's revolutionary Betamax deck, which hooks up to any TV set.
So
Now
much
you can
for watching.
automatically
If this
videotape your
trip
favorite
down
show
memory
even
lane
when
made
you're
you
not
chuckle,
home and
or
watch
even
it
shake your
anytime you
head in disbelief, please hit that like button and be sure to subscribe for more dives into the fascinating and sometimes funny history of things.
Most people who grew up poor in the 1970s didn't know what they were missing, and they assumed everyone lived the very same way. Back then, stretching a dollar was an art form with creative and sometimes funny solutions for being short on cash. Looking back, it's easy to see the struggle, but it's just as easy to smile as you think back on your own childhood. So, here they are, the signs that you might have grown up poor in the 1970s. The creative solutions. In a lot of homes, the TV's channel knob broke off at some point and never got replaced. Instead of buying a new TV set or calling for a repairman, families just grabbed a pair of pliers and kept them on top of the TV as a permanent solution. Turning the dial became a careful operation, especially if the picture was fuzzy. Everyone in the house learned how to use the pliers just right, clicking through the channels slowly, hoping to land on one that came in clear. Wearing patched clothing wasn't anything unusual. When jeans or skirts wore thin or ripped, especially at the knees, parents would sew on a patch instead of tossing them out. Iron-on patches were popular, but sometimes they were stitched on by hand with whatever fabric or thread was around. Clothes were handed down, worn out, patched, and worn again. It wasn't about fashion. It was about keeping things going as long as possible. It wasn't uncommon for a family car to have trouble starting, especially if it was an older model. If the battery was weak, pushing the car to get it rolling and then popping the clutch was the go-to method. One person would sit in the driver's seat while others gave it a push until the engine caught. It was frustrating at times, but it was just another part of daily life when you didn't have the money for repairs. During the winter, bread bags served as makeshift waterproof liners for boots. If your shoes had holes or weren't insulated, you could slip a bread bag over your socks to help keep your feet dry. It wasn't the most comfortable setup, but it was what families used when buying new boots wasn't an option. The food we grew up with. Buying bread from the day-old shelf was common in families trying to stretch a dollar. It was usually just slightly less soft than the fresh loaves, but perfectly fine for toast or sandwiches. No one really thought of it as less than. It was just a practical way to keep the pantry stocked without spending extra. Government assistance programs provided things like large blocks of processed cheese and powdered milk to help families get by. The cheese worked great for sandwiches or even cooking. Powdered milk was mixed with water and stored in the fridge, though it didn't taste much like the real thing. These foods weren't fancy, but they helped stretch the grocery budgets during tough times. Bologna sandwiches were a lunchbox regular for kids in the 70s, served on plain white bread. They were quick, cheap, and filling. Some families fried the bologna in a pan to give it extra flavor. It wasn't gourmet, but it was what many kids grew up eating day after day, and most didn't think twice about it. If you showed up at school without lunch money or a packed meal, the school would give you a plain peanut butter sandwich. It was dry, basic, and came with a carton of milk if you were lucky. It wasn't something kids looked forward to, but it was better than going hungry. Most kids who had to eat it didn't complain. They just ate quietly and moved on with their day. The unspoken rules. Writing a check before payday wasn't reckless. It was strategy. Parents would keep a close eye on what day they got paid and time the check accordingly, knowing it would take a day or two before the bank processed it. It was just one of those everyday ways people made things work when money was tight. When birthdays or holidays rolled around, many families got creative with wrapping paper. Instead of buying expensive gift wrap, they used the comic section of the newspaper or cut up brown paper grocery bags. The results were simple, but they did the job just fine. Sometimes kids even decorated the plain bags with drawings to make them feel more special. In many homes, the thermostat was strictly off limits to kids. If it was cold, you were told to wear a sweater. If it was too hot, you opened a window, but not for long. Leaving a door open, even for a few seconds, was sure to get a sharp reminder from a parent. Trying to keep heating and cooling bills low. These rules weren't meant to be mean. They were just practical. At the start of the school year, teachers often asked kids to write about their summer vacations. For those who hadn't gone anywhere, it meant finding ways to make the ordinary sound exciting. Playing outside, going to the city pool, or visiting the cousins became the highlights. You didn't realize until later that some kids went on big trips. You just figured everyone's summer looked like yours. Looking back, these weren't just signs of being poor. They were signs of being resourceful. These memories are a reminder of a time when we valued creativity over convenience and effort over expense. We were a generation that learned to make do with what we had, and we didn't think twice about it. What was your experience? Let me know in the comments if I missed anything. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more memories from the past.
The 1980s. A decade of big hair, blockbuster movies, and, well, some inventions so out there, you have to wonder, what were they thinking? We all remember the Walkman and the VCR, but what about the brilliant ideas that crashed and burned harder than a stock market broker in 1987? Today, we're digging into 10 of the most spectacular product fails from the iconic 80s. Buckle up, this is going to be a bumpy but hilarious ride. New Coke. Let's start with a true legend of failure. New Coke. In 1985, the Coca-Cola Company made a monumental decision to change its nearly century-old secret formula. Why? Believe it or not, Pepsi was gaining ground in taste tests. So, New Coke was born, sweeter and supposedly preferred in blind tests. The public outcry, however, was immediate and ferocious. People didn't just dislike New Coke, they felt betrayed. Hoarding of original Coke began, protests erupted, and the company was flooded with angry calls and letters. No, within a mere 79 days, Coca-Cola waved the white flag and brought back the original formula, rebranded as Coca-Cola Classic. New Coke limped on for a few more years under different names, but never recovered. It became a textbook example of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Especially when it is a beloved American icon. New Coke, the beverage equivalent of a surprise party nobody wanted. Sometimes, progress tastes an awful lot like regret. Kodak disc film. Remember the excitement of getting your photos developed? Kodak tried to make it even easier in 1982 with their disc film. Instead of a roll, the film was arranged on a flat disc, housed in a plastic cartridge. The cameras were slim, pocketable, and super easy to load. Just pop in the disc. The idea was to make photography foolproof for the average snap shooter. The problem? The negatives on the disc were tiny, just 10 millimeters by 8 meters. This resulted in grainy, often blurry photos if you tried to enlarge them to standard print sizes. Despite massive marketing, the poor image quality couldn't be ignored. Professional photographers scoffed, and even casual users noticed their vacation pics looked a bit sad. While the cameras sold well initially due to convenience, the film format itself was a dud and was eventually discontinued in 1999. Kodak disc film. proving that sometimes convenience comes at the very fuzzy, very grainy price of your memories. Premier cigarettes. In the late 80s, with smoking already facing increased scrutiny, Reynolds Tobacco Company launched Premier, marketed as a cleaner, smokeless cigarette. The technology was complex. A small carbon tip heated a tobacco-like capsule, releasing an aerosol rather than smoke. It produced almost no secondhand smoke and significantly less tar. Sounds like a game changer, right? Well, not quite. Users complained it was difficult to light, had a bizarre, often unpleasant taste and smell. Some compared it to burning plastic, or even worse. One critic famously said it tasted like fecal matter. Moreover, the media and health officials were skeptical, and there were even concerns it could be used as a drug delivery device. After spending hundreds of millions on development, Premier was quickly extinguished from the market within a year. Premier cigarettes, so advanced, they forgot to make them smokable. The future of smoking, apparently, smelled terrible. Seiko TV watch. Imagine this. It's 1982, and James Bond himself is sporting a watch that can receive television broadcasts. The Seiko TV watch, or the DXA001, was pure 80s sci-fi made real. It featured a tiny 1.2-inch liquid crystal display. To actually watch TV, you needed to connect it to a Walkman-sized receiver that you'd typically clip to your belt or keep in a pocket, plus a bulky headset antenna. It was an incredible feat of miniaturization for its time, but practicality was another story. The screen was minuscule, battery life was short, and the price tag was a hefty $495. That's over $1,500 in today's money. It was more of a very expensive, somewhat cumbersome novelty than a truly useful device. While undeniably cool, it didn't exactly fly off the shelves. The Seiko TV watch. For when you absolutely, positively had to watch a grainy, postage stamp-sized soap opera on your wrist, and didn't mind looking like you were trying to contact outer space, feeling that 80s nostalgia, or maybe just marveling at these misfires. If you're enjoying this trip back in time, do us a favor and hit that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next batch of retro oddities and forgotten treasures. Fisher-Price PXL 2000. In 1987, Fisher-Price, known for its durable kids' toys, ventured into a new market with the PXL 2000, also known as Pixel Vision. It was a camcorder marketed to children, promising them the ability to make their own movies. The truly unique and cost-saving part was that it recorded black and white video and audio onto standard audio cassette tapes. Each cassette could hold about 11 minutes of grainy, low-resolution footage. While the idea of a kid-friendly camcorder was appealing, and the $100 price tag was relatively low, the video quality was, to put it mildly, very basic. It was often blurry, with a distinct, ghostly aesthetic. Commercially, it wasn't a huge hit and was discontinued after a couple of years. However, its unique look later made it a cult favorite among experimental filmmakers and artists. The PXL 2000. Making home movies look like eerie surveillance footage from another dimension, all on your dad's old Bon Jovi tapes. Pepsi AM. Need a little pick-me-up with your bacon and eggs? In 1989, Pepsi decided that what the world really needed was a cola specifically for breakfast. Enter Pepsi AM. It boasted all the sugar and twice the caffeine of regular Pepsi, supposedly formulated to compete with coffee. The marketing campaign suggested it was the perfect way to get your day going. Consumers, however, were largely unconvinced that a sugary, highly caffeinated soda was the ideal morning beverage. The idea of cracking open a Pepsi at 7 a.m. just didn't sit right with most folks. Unsurprisingly, Pepsi AM had a very short shelf life and was discontinued by 1990. Pepsi AM. Because who needs coffee when you can start your day with a sugar rush and enough caffeine to power a small city? Apparently, most people. The DeLorean car. Few cars are as instantly recognizable as the DeLorean DMC-12, with its iconic stainless steel body and those futuristic gull-wing doors. Brainchild of former GM exec John DeLorean, it launched in 1981 with immense hype. Marketed as an ethical sports car, it was built in Northern Ireland. However, the dream quickly soured. The car was criticized for being underpowered for its price, had build quality issues, and the stainless steel panels were famously difficult to paint and showed every fingerprint. The company faced severe financial troubles, and John DeLorean himself was arrested in a highly publicized, though ultimately unsuccessful, drug trafficking sting in 1982, an attempt to save his failing company. Production halted by 1983 after only about 9,000 cars were made. While a commercial disaster in its time, its starring role in Back to the Future cemented its place in pop culture history. The DeLorean. It couldn't quite hit 88 mph in the sales charts, but it sure made a dent in cinematic history. Great Scott, what a business plan. Atari Touch Tablet. In the early 80s, home computers were booming, and Atari was a huge name. To enhance its 8-bit computer line, Atari released the Touch Tablet in 1983. This was a graphics tablet that allowed users to draw directly onto the computer screen using a special stylus. It came bundled with a drawing program called Atari Artist. The idea was to make computers more accessible and creative for art and design. While it was a neat concept, the tablet wasn't a massive commercial success. It was perhaps a bit ahead of its time for the home market. The software was limited, and it faced competition from other input devices like joysticks and light pens, which were more geared towards gaming, Atari's main strength. It remained a niche product for enthusiasts rather than a mainstream hit. The Atari Touch Tablet, letting you draw like Picasso, if Picasso only had 16 colors and was really patient with early 80s processing speeds. Private eye display.